My guest in this episode of Suds Search is the incomparable Wil Reynolds. Wil is the founder and vice president of innovation at SEER Interactive, a 150-person digital marketing agency specializing in using big data to improve SEO and paid media campaigns. No offense to any of my other guests, but Wil has been my favorite presenter in SEO for many years now. He's dynamic on stage while packing in tons of useful tips. He has a unique ability to talk about topics that are really technical and then pivot to topics that are really human while being really engaging the entire time. Many of Wil's talks in recent years have been about his passion for big data. He had an epiphany a few years ago when a teammate at SEER challenged him to a keyword research competition. Since then, he's been able to find incredible opportunities for his clients that are entirely overlooked by most SEOs. He's also found ways to save paid search clients hundreds of thousands of dollars in wasted spend. I'm going to start our conversation talking about big data and how SEER uses it to get an advantage. Wil is currently raising money for his annual sleep out supporting the Covenant House. Wil sleeps on the street to raise money for homeless youth in his native Philadelphia. His goal is to raise $25,000 this year. I'm going to ask him all about it during our conversation. Check out the show notes for ways you can contribute. Grab something cold to drink and join me for a conversation with one of the real leaders in SEO. We're going to talk about how to cut waste out of your paid campaigns, why it's important to do RCS, and we'll talk about the time he swapped CEO roles with Rand Fishkin. Wil Reynolds, welcome to Suds Search. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. Today's an interesting day. Today would be interesting either way. I always try to answer that question honestly. And, today's an interesting day. It's the day after the election, obviously. But we're probably not here to talk too much about that. So I won't go down that rabbit hole.
I know. I will say I'm glad I've been a fan of yours for so long because my attention was everywhere today. So it was I've been a fan for a long time. I have a lot of questions I could ask you about all the times I've heard you present, but certainly just a wild time. I want to dive right in. Big data. I've heard you present on this at Content Jam almost a year ago to the day in Chicago. You came and saw us, and this is like a cause for you for a couple of years now. I think for our audience, I've heard you present on this, but maybe set the table about this revelation you had when you learned, and kind of like an ego hit for you a little bit is the way you've described it to me.
Yeah. So one of my team members opened up a Google sheet and said, "I think I can do keyword research better than you can. Would you be willing to go head to head?" And I'm like, "Bring it on." Because if I was better than his tool, then I proved to myself that I was good. And if his tool beat me, then it was an opportunity for me to learn and get better. So it was going to be a win either way. It was either I was going to validate that I'm pretty good at my job, or I was going to find out that I'm not as good as I thought I was. And once we started processing every potential search term on the planet, basically at scale in seconds, it was very obvious that I was getting beat by a tool in a Google sheet over all my experience and my 20 years of doing SEO and picking keywords were pretty much destroyed in 30 minutes.
Wow, it's a great story about, I think, surrounding yourself with good people too, because whoever that is, that took some cojones to even bring up that challenge. But I think that's an unbelievable part of it. And then the other part of it is your kind of superpower not to have this huge ego. I've heard you do these things where you brought in people to replace you at different times, and you've seen SEER's business take off because of it. I wonder, as we sit here today, it's still relatively new. Google has changed their search terms report. You have been fighting the good fight, Wil, on beating back against Google on this. Has this big data approach, has it had to shift at all as a result of this?
Not too much. If Google takes away 25% of all of your search terms, it's still probably, for the average client, I'm still probably looking at, I don't know, maybe 500 million more data points at scale than the average SEO.
Yeah, amazing.
So yeah, like we have a client, I'm working on a client right now. We are analyzing in excess of 1 million keywords to find out what the right words are. And then we're breaking all those keywords out into unigrams. So now we're also not just saying this is a keyword, but then we're breaking out each piece of every word at scale. So then you end up connecting all your keywords to these unigrams. So then you can say, oh, if you got 1,000 clicks right, Mark? If you got 1,000 clicks,
Yeah.
1,000 different words, so you only got
Yeah.
one click all year, and they all converted, you're never going to see that because you're never looking for a search term that got one click. When you
Yeah.
bust out the unigrams of your search terms, you go, each one of those words, each one of those keywords that only got one click all year, they were all using this phrase inside of those words. So most people are going to ignore single click keywords. And I find that there's usually more conversions down there than you think than going after the head keywords that everybody's competing on. But if you're not looking at every single search term at scale, you'll never find them. So therefore, you're going after the same competitive keywords that everybody else with some rushes.
Right. And I think there are missed opportunities, which you mentioned, and that's important. You have these Waste Wednesday videos that are fantastic. You hate waste. You really hate waste spend. You hate wasting it's a great cause to be about. How have you used big data? Do you have any great stories of using big data to save people like a lot of money?
I'm trying to think, what's the biggest find? Ah, man, I think I found once for one client. So we have this tool called Saving Ben. Um, and we once had a client click and they can just click and log in with their Google account. It was a prospective client. I think I found that person $400,000 in inefficiency in about 2 hours.
$400,000. That'll pay for some marketing services at SEER, I would think.
Yeah. I mean, like how many agencies right now have invested to build tools to pay for their first year?
That's
Not many
amazing.
that I know of. So, if I come in and you got paid and I wrangle out 10, 15, 20% of your campaigns and I show you that they're inefficient, and I show you the words that you were showing up for, that you were spending money on, it's a pretty good pitch to say, well, I just paid for myself. The other people that are pitching you, like, did they come in with a way to pay for half this project already? Or are you starting off at zero?
I love it. Yeah. And I wonder your presentation, your style, and it really the message that I heard wasn't just, hey, here's a cool thing, guys, that I learned, and maybe you could use it. It was like a challenge to SEOs and to digital marketers. Like, you're either going to do this or you're going to lose to us. And I wonder, have you gotten some feedback from anyone else that they've said, hey, well, we really took your advice and we're doing great now?
Oh, God. There's so few people that are actually taking the advice, but the people who are very happy.
I would imagine.
The people who are very happy because we're putting it all out there on how to do it. All of us, like, we just kind of want to do the thing that we've been doing that we think is really smart.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of time to have somebody show you that everything you've been doing has flaws, and even the things that I'm doing has flaws, right? So, like, if you're not paying for a keyword, I don't see it, right? So it's like there's flaws in that, but there's a lot less flaws than me. Oh my God, I don't even know how people do keyword research anymore. It's like, what do you, it's like, what do you do? Like, oh, so you go to SEMrush and put in a bunch of words and then you concatenate a bunch of other words off of them. And then and then what do you do? To me, it's like, here are the 500 words I'm going to go after. It just makes no sense. Like, I worked for a really large apparel brand and we went into their stat account. They were tracking 200 keywords or 500 keywords. No, it was like 5,000 keywords a month. But when we took down all their paid search terms for the entire year, it was something like 3.5 million words. You're tracking like less than 1% of all the fucking search terms. And and then because we joined it to the paid data, it's like the words you're tracking only drive 20% of your conversions. The other 80% are coming from all these words you're never going to even know exist.
Oh my God. Well, I love, one of the things I've always loved about your presentations is that you can talk about something that's very technical, like big data, and you can talk about something that's very human, like the example of what you talked about. I wonder if you didn't have like a human problem when you started to do this at SEER, where this paid search guy has been doing paid search the same way for 10 years, and he just did not want to get out of his silo and collaborate with the SEO. How did that whole human problem work out for you guys?
All right. Well, people don't learn in a podcast if I only talk about, like, rainbows and unicorns, right? So I remember the first time I ran this analysis for a client. I found, a keyword, and that keyword had spent like $197. The search term spent like 190. It was slightly under $200 all year. And I remember when I first showed it to the human on the other side, I'm like, yo, there's this word that means something completely different than what our client does. And they're like, oh, let me look at that. And they're like, oh my God, like I'm going to go in and negate this one word, but Will, it only spent $190 on an account that spends $3 or $4 or $5 million a year. And I'm like, do you know how many other words have spent less than $200 all year? And the person was like, no. I'm like, tap, tap, tap. Oh, it's 96% of all your spend have come on keywords that are just like this one.
Yeah.
So we need to find at scale how to find these, because it's going to help your client to be happier when you drop their CPA a ton, because we're getting rid of all these clicks that look like these. And I think that was that moment. And then we just had a coming to Jesus moment at SEER where it was like, this is how we're going to do things. You can either spend time fighting it or not. But like I needed a UVP to take to the market, right? I needed something to go to the market to say, this is why you should pick SEER. And at the time, the only thing that I had was like Google had said some really good things about us. We're like, Google said these really good things about our paid search team and blah, blah, blah. And that's helpful. But then like Google was also saying good things about other teams too. Right. So when our clients had seen that Google was saying good things about those other teams, they're like, well, I'm talking to all the teams that I've seen Google say good things about. So what else do you have? And we're like, you know, we got like a really cool way to work inside of Marin or whatever, you know, it was just like, no, we needed something and our clients expected something. So I said, well, you know what? Let's go where none of the other teams are going to go. These pure play PPC teams are never going to join SEO data because they don't think in terms of scraping Google for intelligence. Well, I do. So I said, let's attach to that. And then there we go from there. So we attract a very specific type of client, but deep down, most people don't want to spend more money for their headphones and shirts if they didn't have to. If you could get that same headset you're wearing right now for 30% less, wouldn't you? Well, if you could pay 30% less for your clicks and get roughly the same amount of conversions, wouldn't you?
I love your hatred for waste. It's so inspiring. I think there's a couple of things I want to make sure I get this in before I forget. So you're coming up pretty soon is your annual sleep out. This benefits the Covenant House in Philadelphia. First of all, it's an amazing cause. Tell us about it and how people can get involved.
Sure. So this is my like 9th or 10th year. Every November, second week in November, third week in November, I think it is. I sleep outside overnight to raise money with a group of other really awesome people to raise money for homeless kids. And you know, we also get to talk to the kids. And it's crazy, man. It's crazy. You know, This is one of the benefits of volunteerism is it helps you keep your own problems in fucking check. So, you know, like if I have a bad day at work or some shit, and then when I go to my sleep outs, you know, I've had years where we've done vigils for the kids that we lost that year to addiction and things like that. I've literally talked to kids who have been thrown out in the winter with no shoes on because their parents found out that they were gay. And you're like, wait, your parents threw you out of the house in the winter with no shoe, with slippers on? Because they found out that you were gay? And they're like, yeah, that's how I ended up in a homeless shelter. And you're like, you know what? Like, yeah, I want to be a part of fixing that wrong in some capacity. And whatever made my day tough today, I'm not going to even think about anymore. So working with these, the youth at the Covenant House has just been such a reward in the sense of like hearing their stories stick with you. You know, and then you see some folks who came into a homeless shelter and are now like on a 4-year ride in college. And you go, right, man, like there's just so many, I don't know, there's so much good that comes from that organization and what they've done with kids in our city that I can't help but support them. So yeah, I'm sleeping out again. I'm trying to raise 25G, which will take me to, I think 100. If I've raised 25,000, I think it'll take me to 140 or 150,000 raised over the last 10 years, which would be a really nice milestone.
Yeah. Well, how did beyond just the sleep out? Tell us about the Covenant House as a partner and how people can be involved if they want to. Sure. Sounds like an amazing organization.
The good thing about the Cov is that it's not everywhere, but it's in like 30 cities. Like they're in New York. I know that they're in New Orleans. They're in Atlantic City, New Jersey. They're in Vancouver. They may be in Chicago. They're all over. So you can sleep out if you'd like. I'll be on Zooms and shit all night, just like talking to people because I'm going to be cold. So I'm not sleeping. I'm not sleeping well. But outside of donating to my sleep out, you can choose to sleep out and raise money for yourself, or just like listen in on some of the stories that the youth will share. And I think the thing is we all see homeless people, and I think we can all rationalize different reasons why they might be in the position they're in. The thing that I love about the Covenant House is they specifically work with youth that are 18 to like 23-ish. So these are kids who were in like foster care oftentimes and whatnot. And like we didn't all instantly mature when we turned 18. And I think a lot of us can reflect on, yeah, I was making some bad choices when I was 18 still, right? And like these kids don't want to be in like adult shelters with like 50, 60-year-old men like
Oh,
that, or
hell
women
no.
that just, no way, right? So then
Yeah.
I think like, man, like back when I was 18, 19, 20, I was making some dumb decisions myself.
For sure.
Luckily I had a strong support system around me, but you don't just instantly mature. And I love that the Covenant House works specifically with youth that are like past the time where the government has to take care of you, but you may not be totally ready to live completely on your own. And they give them a safe place to be for youth that are experiencing homelessness.
Well, we'll make sure to put a link in the show notes, and bravo to you and to SEER for what you're doing. I think it's just it's an amazing cause. I want to ask you a question about sort of this human condition. It's amazing. The last two guests I've had on mentioned you. Mike King, who was on, mentioned you. You are one of the most popular people in the industry. You've Will Critchlow, who was on this week, mentioned you, and he said, we're kind of direct competitors, but we're buddies, like we're friends. And
He and I are chatting tomorrow.
yeah, right. And so I wanted to see if you could give people tips on building a professional network. And you seem to be so successful at it. How did you do it?
I'm bad at it. I hate networking. I'm a nerd. Like I don't like long lines at conferences when people want to talk to me. Like it gives me like anxiety and shit. Um, it's funny, nothing gives me anxiety except for a long line of people waiting to talk to me after a conference.
Yeah.
Because I like to be invested in people and look at them in the eye and talk to them. And when there's a long line, you're also trying to like, you're breaking eye contact to look around them to tell other people to wait up because you want to help them too. That's the only thing that causes me anxiety. Nothing else in the world gives me anxiety. That will flying a little bit. But no, so it's never been intentional. I just try to fucking help people. Mark, I think too many of us that run businesses, like I went to school to be a teacher, and I always remind people that like I thought I was going to make like 60, 70 grand the rest of my life and teach kids, and I was going to be thrilled with that. So I never came from a place of, ooh, well, like I can't give out all my secrets. Like no teacher ever says I can't give out all my secrets. Like when like a lot of people when they're on stage, they're trying to give you just enough for you to call them or use them. And early and from the day I started, I was like, well, wouldn't you share everything you know? And
Yeah.
people were like, no, like
No,
you don't want to do that. How are you going to get leads? So what I think happens is there's been this feeling that people have had with me, which is authentic and true because it's how I kind of came up, is like they're like, that guy gives out really good shit. And he never is trying to like hook me in to sign up for the email list or like call me later. And I think that created this feeling of like, damn, he seems like a pretty good fucking guy. Right. And when people are talking to me, I'm always willing to share everything that I'm working on and what I'm doing. And there's not that tension of, oh, well, I can't really tell you that. Like, whereas like, a lot of people will tell. And then you get to a certain point, you're like, oh, well, that's kind of my black box. And I'm like, I don't have a black box. I've always believed that when I share everything I know, it puts it out in the world in a way that makes me feel like I got to go make something new. See, when you hold on to something that you think is really smart, sometimes you can think you're too smart for your own fucking good. And maybe what you have really ain't that smart. But with me, when I share everything that I'm working on publicly, I'm like, well, now everybody knows it. My competitors know it and can copy it. Everybody knows it. So it forces me to go back and innovate instead of sitting around with my little thing being like, this thing is so good, nobody's going to know how to do it.
I love that. Yeah, and I would underline your point. We started out by talking about big data. You can go to your, I mean, we should put these in the show notes too, but we can go to SEER's YouTube channel and learn how to use step-by-step Power BI. There's no, as far as I know, there's no secrets that you guys are keeping from the public. I mean, it's all out there.
Zero. And I have learned that I tend to get more from that approach than showing a little bit and then be like, call me,
Yeah. All right. So I have one of my favorite Wil Reynolds-isms of all time, and I've stolen this from you, and I do give you credit, but RCS. We talk about this all the time in local. It's hard to build links. It's hard to create content sometimes for, I don't know, an HVAC company or something like that. We really need this at Search Lab. How have you used this? Maybe explain what RCS means and how you've used this at SEER and in your career.
So RCS, so I look back at, I tend to do these things where I go away from the industry to look back at it from a distance. And when I go away from the industry and I sit down at a PR conference where nobody's doing search and nobody's talking about search, and then I go and I read, like, I don't think I have it up here. I think I used to have it up here. There's a book called Scientific Advertising, My Life in Advertising, and it was written in 1900. And it was about advertising in the 1900s. I'm like, let me go read that. Like back when people had to make real ad copy, not this computer generated GPT-3 crap, right? Like when people had to actually understand who their customer was because they were selling face to face. I'm going to go read that. So while everybody's reading what's happening on search today, I'm going outside of the industry to think about, like, well, how do I better connect with people? Because ultimately people are the people Googling stuff. People are the people reading your content, right? And when I step out, it helps me to come up with things. And that's where real company shit came from, or RCS. Is it was this concept of, like, I was sitting in rooms and being like, watching people say things like, hey, if you're doing outreach for links and you use a name that's like a female pseudonym, like my open rate is like 15% higher. And you watched people like being like, yo, dude, you hear that shit? Like, and I'm like, so let's just really look at what we just said. And nobody was calling that kind of behavior out.
Yeah.
Like, so you are lying to people when you email them. And we are celebrating, and that's what we're celebrating. And that's what some people in this room are taking away, is not, I should get to know my customer better. It's, not that I should build something that makes people want to link to it because it actually helps people solve a problem. It is, let me put in a name of a girl and create a whole fake profile and whatnot so that I look kind of attractive. I'm like, get the fuck out of here, man. Like, this is fake company shit. It's like so much of what SEOs were doing, I would listen to it and be like, why am I not hearing this with the people who get billions of dollars or millions of dollars on marketing? Why don't they sound like this? Why do they keep talking about customers, right? Like, why do they talk about personalization? Why do they talk about all that stuff? And we're just like, taking notes on the newest, coolest tool. So that was the big thing that kind of sparked RCS. Is I was just like, so then I just held my team to a higher standard.
Yeah.
I said, like you have to do things in your workday that when you go home, you feel good about what you did. And if you're faking that you're somebody you're not, or you're doing some gangster shady shit, then like you're not going to feel good about your job when you go home. So let's like not do that.
Yeah.
Simple.
I like that.
Just do real company shit. Like shit that real companies do. Like real companies sponsor their little league t-ball organizations. Real companies sponsor sleep outs and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Right.
Mass giveaways right now is a good example of a real company. Yeah.
Right. But so often we're like, oh, if I can find a way to figure out a way to trick the person at this company to do this thing, I can get a link from them. It's like, or you could just like better understand what your customers actually want and how to support those organizations and get legitimate links.
I love it. And I want to just say, I mean, over the years I've followed you. It's nice to meet you in person. You've been
it's nice to meet you
an amazing teacher. It's I understand you were an economics teacher at one time.
Yeah, I taught high school economics for just my student teaching, and then I realized it wasn't the right thing for me.
Well, very good. Well, this is everyone's favorite part of the show. This is where Greg Gifford tells me to ask the guest a question, and he gives me no context. And so I don't know much, but he said, ask Wil about CEO swap.
Oh, okay. So, it's funny. I'm always trying to see other perspectives and learn stuff, And one day, not too far from the office on where I am, so if I walked up a block, which you can't really see, but like, I don't know how good this is going to be for a podcast, but if you walked up that street, up to the corner and made a right, you would eventually run into a bar called Barcade. And Rand Fishkin was visiting one day, and me, him, Geraldine, and my wife Nora, we were sitting in the bar, and I'm like, what would be really cool? We had way too many beers. I'm like, like wife swap, but for CEOs, where like you swap into another CEO's job and like you completely like get their email and everything. And we ended up doing that. And it was, I just gained so much empathy, like I think I was like, oh shit, this is the kind of shit that my SaaS clients, because SaaS company, right? Like these are the kind of tough decisions they're making. And I was part of these meetings and helping to make certain decisions. And you're like, holy shit, man, like, is this what it's like to be venture backed? So then I met with a bunch of like the investors and like what they look for. And like, well, I would be asking Rand about this, and that, like, and I'm like, nobody asked me questions like that. Like, okay, so that's what my clients are going through, and vice versa. Rand got to see when our teams would stop using his tools, which was super helpful for him.
Yeah, I bet.
Like when people are like, oh, I'm using Moz now. Oh, nope, it did that. Fuck it, I'm out. I'm gonna go use Ahrefs. He was like, oh, I got to see like when people abandoned my software, right? So no, that was basically it. I think we both just walked away learning so much about each other, but also like I'll tell you, like the thing I learned about Rand, that dude actually answers almost everybody back. Like I just delete emails. I'm like, I can't email.
Yeah, right.
And he literally puts in the time to answer everybody back, man. It was exhausting to try to keep up with the amount of people he tries to help.
Yeah, he's amazing with that email thing. I sent him a note because he's going to be on this show coming up, and like 5 seconds later, he gets, okay, thanks, show, hope you enjoyed it. And it's like, wow, you're unbelievable with this. So
no, he is. He's very willing to give of his time. And when you read somebody's email, you know what? We all have these personas and these facades, and I try not to have it. That's why I talk about a lot of hard company stuff on my blog and stuff like that, because we all go through hard stuff, but nobody wants to talk about it because we all want these like personas of constantly being successful, right? Yeah. So, most people, the only time it's like a shit sandwich. We only talk about our failures if it ultimately worked out well, because then we have that good story to tell at the end. And like when you have somebody's inbox for a week and they don't have access to it, you learn who they actually are. Because you see when people respond to their emails, you see the threads of how they were talking to people before you came along, right? And
that's a great point. Yeah.
If they were helping people, or if they were doing this, or if they were doing that. So it was very, it was like being exposed, like me and Rand were tight before the CEO swap, obviously. But he got to validate if who he thought I really was is who I actually was, because he's getting, 500, 600 emails every day from random people, one of which was my mother. My mom like emailed him and asked him for help thinking it was me. And she's like, oh, Will, you come over and fix this thing. And Rand's like, Miss Reynolds, do you need me to come over? Remember, like, it's Rand. I got your son's inbox for the week.
Oh my gosh. Well, unbelievable. And I will say, I sort of knew that story. It's in Lost and Founder, and there's a really good YouTube. I'll link to it, that somebody did like an animation of you and Rand. It was kind of amazing. I'll make sure I link to it. It's very, very good story. And you two are amazing. So Will, thank you so much for coming on Suds Search. We had a great time talking with you. I know it's a wild day, so I appreciate you taking a little moment to have a beer with me.
I mean, it's always a pleasure to break up the day a little bit, especially on a day like today. It was nice to get away from the day-to-day for a half hour and spend it with you.
I agree. Well, I'm going to sign off. Thanks again for coming on, and we'll see you next time on Suds Search.
You got it, brother. Anytime. Take care.
Take care.